Do you really think a warehouse and a whisk can replace a childhood Marley? That was what Celeste Granger whispered before having her dragged out of the building. Minutes later, Marley Quinn held the last proof that could destroy the company's lies, hidden inside a forgotten recipe baked into something no one believed could matter, Moose. But memory has flavor, and sometimes justice comes dusted in cocoa. Before we dive in, let me know, what time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The dryer hummed like a distant highway, steady and cold. Marley stood over a plastic folding table, smoothing Jude's sweatshirt with more care than it needed. A man in a stained flannel passed behind her and muttered something low and crude. She didn't flinch. Her hands kept folding. The boy's sneakers sat beside her, one sole peeling loose like a tongue. Jude hunched near the window knees, drawn up a paperback stretched open in his lap. He hadn't spoken since they arrived. Marley reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded paper edges frayed from too many thumbprints. She opened it just enough to see the bold black letters, postponed. Custody hearing continued. The corner of her mouth twitched, then smoothed flat. She crushed the page into her tote, careful not to let the boy see. Across the laundromat, two women sat close, their voices soft but pointed. One of them, gray curls pinned back with a pencil, nodded in Marley's direction before whispering something behind her hand. A voice behind her, too familiar, sliced through the dry air. Some fights just aren't worth the bruises, Marley. She turned. A woman in a tan coat and scarf stepped forward, clipboard under one arm. Marley recognized her. County Services. From before? The woman offered a half smile, maybe meant to be gentle, maybe not. You can't pour from an empty cup, she added. Marley didn't reply. Her gaze drifted to the boy, still sunk deep in whatever world his book offered. She picked up the sneakers, thumb brushing the split seam. Outside, wind tossed a soda can across the curb. Jude stood and slung his backpack over one shoulder. He didn't speak until they stepped into the light. If I don't trust anyone, is that still okay? He asked, staring at the sidewalk. She paused, her fingers tightening around the strap of the tote. Yeah, she said. But Moose doesn't need anyone to believe in it. It's still Moose. He frowned, trying to decide if that made sense. They crossed the intersection. A faded notice flapped loose on a wooden pole ahead, the tape barely holding. Marley slowed, squinting at the line in red warehouse. B-17, no reserve bid. Final clearance, $50. Her eyes narrowed. Jude kept walking. She stayed behind a second longer. The paper curled in the breeze, whispering against the pole, like it had something to say. The flyer from the pole was still in her hand when they reached the lot. Cold mist hung low over the parking spaces, clinging to the metal chairs and chain-link fence like it belonged there. Marley pulled her coat tighter and shifted her weight, the cracked pavement beneath her boots uneven and slick. Jude yawned behind the collar of his hoodie, his backpack slipping down one shoulder while her fingers kept whirring at the folded edge of the paper. The auctioneer's voice rasped through a weathered speaker set on a folding table, the feedback whining between phrases. Next lot, warehouse B-17, no reserve. Starting bid $50. Do I hear 50? Nothing. Just the shuffle of worn soles, the scratch of pens, a cough somewhere behind her. People around them barely looked up, contractors. Part-time flippers, the city's usual scavengers hunting for salvageable scraps. Marley glanced at the clipboard in her hand. Lot B-17 was circled in blue ink. A beat passed. Then she raised her hand. The silence that followed had weight. A man in a puffy jacket leaned to his buddy and muttered, too loud to be private. Hell's she gonna do with a pile of mold and bird crap? Another one chuckled. She buying a warehouse or a coffin? The auctioneer blinked once, then twice. 50 going once. Twice. Sold. No gavel, just a metallic clink as he scribbled her number onto the sheet. Marley nodded once, lips pressed tight. She felt Jude's gaze but didn't meet it. As the small crowd began to shift toward the next listing, a pair of heels clicked rapidly across the concrete. Marley didn't have to turn. The scent of perfume, something cool, expensive surgical, reached her before the voice did. Marley. Grace stood there in a pale gray blazer and gloves, clipboard tucked tight against her ribs. Her hair was pulled back, not a strand out of place. You actually went through with it. Marley gave a short nod. Jude edged closer to her side. You bought a condemned warehouse, Grace continued, tone level. You think that's something the court would view as stable housing for a 10-year-old? The edge in her words was barely hidden. Jude stiffened. Marley looked straight ahead. We'll be conducting a follow-up before the next hearing. I hope you have something to show. Without another word, Grace turned and walked off, heels echoing like a metronome across the asphalt. One of the city staff handed Marley a small ring of keys. 4 of them were rusted, nearly fused together. The 5th, shiny brass, looked newer, as if someone had kept it separate. On the top, barely visible, MF-271 carved by hand. The man handing her the keys leaned in slightly. Place used to belong to this reclusive guy. Claimed he invented some kind of dessert no one had ever tasted before. He laughed under his breath. Filed a lawsuit against Granger Foods, said they stole his formula. Didn't end well. He disappeared after that. Guess you're the lucky one now. He winked, then moved on. Marley stared at the key thumb grazing the edge where a tiny notch had chipped away the metal. Behind her, Jude whispered, "What's MF stand for?" "I don't know," she murmured, slipping it into her coat. A short silence fell between them until Grace's voice returned, tossed over her shoulder. At the next hearing, Jude will be old enough to speak for himself. We'll ask where he wants to live. Jude's eyes darted up. Marley didn't respond. She didn't need to. That comment wasn't for her benefit, it was meant to land somewhere deeper. She turned without a word and took Jude's hand. His fingers curled into hers, automatically smaller, but firm. Together they stepped through the thinning crowd, past folding chairs and coffee cups abandoned on the sidewalk. When they reached the corner, Jude slowed. Are we really gonna live there? Marley hesitated. Her grip tightened. It's ours now. Traffic passed in the distance. Across the street, parked halfway behind a lamppost, sat a black sedan with its windows up. The engine hummed low, barely audible beneath the wind. The person behind the wheel didn't move. Jude didn't notice it. He'd started tracing the edge of the keychain clipped to his belt. Marley, though, kept her eyes on the car a beat longer before turning toward the direction of the warehouse. The sound of the auctioneer calling out the next lot faded behind them. The paper in her coat pocket crinkled as she walked. She didn't check it again. The number was already burned into her memory. By the time they reached the warehouse, the street had quieted. Marley slid the key into the lock, metal stiff against her hand. The door shrieked as she pried it open, grinding against wood long, warped by weather and time. Dust rose in sheets, floating like ash in the narrow beam of her flashlight. Jude coughed hard behind her sleeve, pressed to his face, but she stepped forward anyway. The air hung heavy, damp, stale, untouched. The place reeked of mildew and rust. No power, no running water. Marley spread a blue tarp over a patch of cleaner concrete, smoothing it with her palms, as if that small act could anchor the space. Jude folded himself, cross-legged, eyes wide but silent. Her beam skimmed over the corners, searching without knowing what for, until it caught on something against the far wall, an old machine half covered in canvas copper, piping snaking from its back, a hand crank jutting from the side. She crouched beside the relic, brushing away cobwebs and grit. It had weight as though it hadn't shifted in decades. The crank resisted her touch but hadn't broken. Nearby, duct taped to the underside of a shelf, a tin box waited. She tugged it free and snapped the lid open. A book the size of her palm lay inside cover, faded corners, chewed by time. Handwriting crowded every page, recipes, notes, calculations in pencil, some so faint they barely clung to the paper. A slip wedged into the spine read, "If they find this, it starts again." That night, after Jude drifted off beneath a blanket pulled tight to his chin, Marley lay staring at the ceiling. The wind kept shifting outside, but what unsettled her more was the low purr of an engine stopping and starting along the street. She peered through a crack in the wooden slats. The black car from the auction hadn't moved. She dropped the makeshift curtain and slid back down the wall poles, ticking fast behind her ribs. Morning brought a milky sun and a headache. She left Jude with a puzzle book and walked 10 blocks to a repair shop whose faded sign read, Heart and Sons. Small engines, vintage tools, custom restorations. The shop smelled of oil and wood shavings. Tools hung from pegboards in neat rows. A man stood behind the counter, tall, broad-shouldered, wiping his hands on a gray rag. His beard showed more gray than black, with lines etched deep around his eyes. "I've got something old," she said. He nodded once. "Don't we all?" Marley unzipped her backpack and pulled out a photo of the contraption. The man froze at a single glance. "Where'd you find it?" Her shoulders tensed. "I bought a warehouse. That came with it." "It was in the corner," she answered. "I think it's for baking. There's a crank. Copper coils." She hesitated. "I want to fix it." His gaze held hers a moment longer before he turned away and reached for a notepad. "Bring it in. I'll take a look." Back at the warehouse, Jude hunched near the machine, fingers resting on the hand crank. It didn't move, but he turned it slowly in the air, pretending it did. Marley set her backpack down and reached once more for the small book. The handwriting shifted tone halfway through more frantic, slanted annotations, crammed into margins. "Never let moose sit more than 3 hours. Test batch 17 caused minor swelling, then underlined 3 times in red. If they find it, it'll all blow open again." She flipped the pages back and forth, trying to piece the logic. Some notes resembled formulas, others read more like warnings than recipes. Her thumb grazed a dog-eared page marked only with a symbol, half circle over 2 dots. A shadow moved across the tarp. She looked up. Jude sat with both hands on the machine, now eyes half closed, almost reverent. The light through the broken window fell across his cheek, catching the dust in the air like snow. Marley crouched beside him, one hand on his back. The boy didn't flinch. She glanced at the machine, then the book again. Something about it felt too much, the kind of thing that lured people in and left them stranded halfway through. Jude turned the handle once more, slow and steady. "Do you think it still works?" Her mouth opened, then closed. Whatever answer she had didn't seem right. She watched him trace the edge of the brass wheel lips, pressed tight in concentration. A knot tightened beneath her ribs. This wasn't just rusted steel and forgotten notes anymore. It was starting to breathe. The next morning, Marley wrapped the photograph of the contraption in her bag and set out. The bell over the shop door gave a tired jingle as she stepped into Hart & Sons. The scent there was thick with motor oil, an old pine, sharp metallic, faintly sweet. Rows of machines lined the walls, some half-assembled, others gutted for parts. The place looked less like a repair shop and more like a personal museum of forgotten tools built over decades. Elias stood near the back sleeves, rolled up goggles, pushed high on his forehead. He nodded when he saw her, then pointed toward the workbench. The baking device lay disassembled across a faded towel, its gears and piping spread out like pieces of a puzzle, too complex for anyone sane to solve. He picked up a brass gear and rolled it in his palm. "This isn't something someone built in a shed," he muttered, "not homemade. This crank here, it's based on commercial units from the 50s. And this coil system, it's cooling tech, but manual. No plug, no motor. All pressure-driven." Marley leaned closer, eyes searching the metal, as if it might yield an explanation. "So it's valuable." Elias set the gear down and wiped his hands. "It's rare. But more than that, it's intentional. Every part of this was built with a purpose." He tapped the edge of a small panel. "People don't make things like this unless they're trying to hide what it does." She stayed silent, giving a single nod. While sorting through the smaller pieces, he paused, squinting at a narrow gap along the base. Reaching for a screwdriver, he pried the edge. Something thin slipped loose, slightly curled, folded tight. A yellowing strip of paper fluttered onto the table. He unfolded it slowly, a diagram hand-drawn showing what looked like a fluid routing system. Several parts were labeled with acronyms and numbers. At the bottom, a line scrawled in rushed ink. "If anyone finds this trace batch 9G17 at Granger HQ." Elias tilted the paper so she could see. Someone didn't want this forgotten. Her mouth had gone dry. The name Granger alone made her stomach tighten. "You ever hear of a guy named Finch?" Elias asked without looking up. She shook her head. "Marshall Finch. He used to work for Granger Foods. Kind of a recluse, kind of a genius. Story goes he tried to sue them for stealing a mousse formula he'd developed. Company settled out of court. A few weeks later, Finch vanished. They called it suicide, and this machine could have been his, or made using his notes. Hell, could have been the prototype." Marley stared at the paper. The lines wavered slightly from the tension in her hand. Back at the warehouse, the floor creaked as she crossed the room with a wet rag. Jude sat near the wall drawing on cardboard with a dull pencil. He barely glanced up. She grabbed the small book again, flipping to a page near the center. The handwriting matched the note Elias had found. The same jagged strokes, the same rushed pen. She ran her thumb along the margin where the paper had once been tucked. The words came out low. "I'm not a fighter. I never was." Elias had offered to help fix the machine, but Marley wasn't sure fixing anything made sense anymore. The last time she'd stood in a courtroom, she'd let silence speak for her. Let fear settle the score. "I just want things quiet," she said aloud, though no one was near enough to respond. A knock sounded against the metal door. She stood stiffly and opened it a crack. Grace. The woman's expression was unreadable, clipboard in hand. "Unannounced inspection," she said. Marley stepped aside. Jude looked up, then dropped his pencil. Grace walked a slow circle, inspecting the ceiling, the plumbing that didn't exist, the single working space heater humming in the corner. Her pen scratched across the form. "You'll be getting a notice. Conditions don't meet basic safety standards. We'll recommend alternative housing until this is resolved." Jude stood. "You said I could decide," he said, voice low. Grace turned but didn't answer. Marley watched him step away past the machine toward the back of the warehouse. He didn't look at her. His shoulders hunched as he moved, shrinking into his hoodie. After Grace left, the air felt colder. She walked to the door and pulled it shut. That's when she noticed it. Near the bottom corner, chalk scratched across the metal, faint but deliberate. A circle crossed by a single line, almost like a target or a warning. Not something she or Jude had made. It hadn't been there yesterday. With the chalk mark still pressed in her mind, Marley carried the folded diagram in her coat pocket and pushed through the doors of Granger Foods. The front desk felt colder than the tile beneath her feet. White light bounced off glass walls and steel finishes, too bright, too polished. She approached the receptionist, her question coming out steady enough. "I'd like to speak with someone about Marshall Finch." The receptionist's polite expression barely shifted. Her nails tapped the keyboard with unnecessary precision. "One moment." Marley waited. She studied the sleek lobby. Everything about it was clean to the point of erasure. Artificial plants and concrete planters stood motionless. A corporate slideshow looped silently across a massive screen. Frozen strawberries being flash-packed, a smiling team in lab coats. Slogans like, "Purity you can taste," dissolving into the next frame. She shifted her weight. Jude had asked her this morning if she really needed to come. She had said yes, but truthfully, she didn't know what she expected. A man in a fitted blazer eventually arrived and gestured wordlessly. He led her through a glass corridor and into a small windowless room. A chair waited behind a low table, nothing else. No clock, no magazines, just still air and the faint scent of disinfectant. He left without closing the door completely. Minutes passed before the door opened again. This time it wasn't a junior associate or legal rep. Celeste Granger herself stepped through the heel of one shoe, tapping softly before the other. She looked younger than Marley had imagined. Polished, controlled. Every movement smooth, deliberate. "You must be the one asking about Finch." Celeste sat opposite her and didn't offer a handshake. Instead, she crossed one leg, her suit jacket folding without a wrinkle. Marley reached into her coat and unfolded the paper. She slid it across the table. Celeste didn't touch it. "I'd like to know what this is," Marley said. Celeste scanned it briefly, then looked up. "It's not something meant for public hands." "Is it real?" There was a pause, barely perceptible. "Whatever you've heard," Celeste said, "I can assure you Mr. Finch's work was reviewed, discredited, and respectfully closed. He suffered from delusions near the end. It's a sad chapter. We moved on." Marley tapped the schematic. "This diagram references a specific batch 9G17. Was that yours?" Celeste finally picked up the page. She didn't examine it, only folded it once and laid it aside. "You're in possession of proprietary material. You could be held accountable for that." "I didn't steal anything." "That won't be the question if this gets louder." The words slipped out like a gentle threat wrapped in silk. Marley studied her face. The smile was small, calculated. It didn't touch her eyes. "We're very careful with our processes," Celeste went on, "especially when people start chasing ghosts." Before Marley could reply, two security guards appeared at the doorway. Not aggressive, just present, enough to shift the tone of the room. Celeste stood. I suggest you return to your warehouse, and maybe let sleeping things stay that way. The guards walked her out without laying a hand. Marley said nothing on the way to the parking lot. The elevator ride stretched longer than it should have. She held the folded schematic tight in her fist, dampening the edges with sweat she hadn't realized was there. Back at the warehouse, something felt off before she even opened the door. The lock sat crooked, and the bottom edge of the door frame had been scuffed. Someone had tried to force it, then covered their tracks poorly. Jude met her near the entrance. His face was pale. The door was already open when I got home, he said. I didn't go in. Marley pushed it open slowly. Nothing was overturned. No drawers pulled, no shelves ransacked. But the small metal box where she'd kept the recipe book now sat ajar. She reached for the notebook. 2 pages were missing. She flipped rapidly through it. The middle section had been torn out, the spine bent and bruised. Whoever had done it knew what they wanted. The rest of the book felt hollow without those pages. Jude lingered near the wall. His voice came out thin. Do you think they're trying to scare us? She didn't answer. Her hands trembled as she turned to the final page, the one she'd barely glanced at before. Scrawled in the bottom corner, the same jagged handwriting. They added the compound because Moose remembers. And memory is more dangerous than poison. A low hum buzzed from the old light overhead. She sank to the floor, legs folding underneath her. The paper stayed open in her lap. Jude stepped closer, then stopped again, watching her carefully, as if the room itself might shift without warning. The warning stayed with her, through the night, circling louder than sleep. By morning, she was following the only lead she'd heard: whispers that Finch had hidden out in an abandoned church on the edge of town. The building stood alone, flanked by a weed-choked lot and a row of crumbling sheds that once held factory tools, or maybe bodies no one wanted found. Marley parked a block away and walked, coat zipped to the chin boots, brushing through windblown trash. The sanctuary doors had been chained long ago, but a side entrance gave under her shoulder. The air that met her was thick, old incense mildew, and something sweeter buried deep in the wood grain, like dried flowers or forgotten wine. She moved carefully between collapsed pews, dust shaking loose from her coat in soft clouds. A pane of stained glass once an angel had shattered, leaving jagged blue edges that caught the light just enough to mimic a halo long gone. She didn't linger. The rumor hadn't come from anyone reliable, just the kind of voice found in laundromats and pawn shops that Finch used to hide here after he went underground. Maybe truth, maybe not. At the rear stood the confessionals. Though small, the booths remained intact. One door creaked open at her touch hinges, dry and loud in the stillness. She slipped inside, crouched near the wall, and tapped lightly. Hollow. Her fingers traced a seam along the lower panel. A careful pry with a hairpin snapped the false board free. Behind it waited a worn envelope, yellowed and stained in one corner. The photograph within stole her breath. 2 young men stood shoulder to shoulder beside a gleaming version of the same contraption, now half rusted in her warehouse. One bore Finch's recognizable jawline and thoughtful eyes. The other, taller with a sharper posture, was Elias. She flipped the image. Ink had faded, but the words were still legible. September 1999. Hart and Finch. Her stomach tightened. She slipped the photo into her coat and left the booth. That evening, after Jude had drifted into shallow sleep, Marley knocked at the back door of Hart & Sons. Shop lights glowed faint through the frosted glass. Elias appeared in jeans and a grease-streaked flannel brows pulling together when he saw her. She didn't wait. You knew Finch. He blinked once, then stepped aside. The workshop smelled of oil and warm steel. Tools lined the pegboards in perfect order. A half-assembled toaster lay disemboweled on the counter. Marley pulled the photograph from her pocket, unfolded it, and slid it across the table. Elias stared down his hand, hovering above the image, but never touching. We built the prototype together, he finally said. Marshall had vision, Hart, but no brakes. He thought if the truth got out, people would demand change. I told him no one listens unless there's a scandal with teeth. Marley sat without asking, and then he vanished. Elias exhaled slow. I bailed before the lawsuit started. Granger made him sign NDAs, boxed him out of the patents then. I don't know what they did, but I know what they erased. Why didn't you say something sooner? He rubbed his jaw. Because I was scared. Still am. Her voice dropped. They broke into my place, ripped pages from the notebook, Jude's scared to sleep alone. Elias pulled open a drawer and produced a small dusty hard drive wrapped in a cloth napkin. He sent me this the week before he disappeared. Said if anything ever happened to him, it'd explain everything. But I could never crack the encryption. No password, no access. Marley took it heavy and cold in her palm. If I chase this, I could lose custody. Again. If I vanish like him, then your boy sees you vanish again, Elias cut in. Or he watches you fight this time. His words were quiet, but they didn't need volume. Later that night, Marley sat cross-legged on the warehouse floor, the hard drive resting between them. Jude sketched absent shapes on a pad, then tore a page free and handed it over. You think MF271 might be a password? She blinked. What made you think that it's on the key on the wall and in the notebook, Jude said. If I were hiding something, I'd pick something only I would recognize. The numbers held her eyes. A long pause stretched. Jude leaned closer, voice low. I don't think Finch wanted to disappear. I think he wanted someone to finish what he started. Her gaze shifted to the contraption in the corner copper, tubing glinting faintly. The laptop waited beside the drive, its cursor blinking. She typed the letters slowly. The screen flashed, then Finch's notes unfurled recipes, warnings, reminders that mousse was meant to be shared. By dawn, jars cooled on the counter. Now she carried a tray through the alley behind the laundromat, Jude following, with another smaller one. The mousse glimmered under the morning light, chilled from the night air. At the community garden, wildflowers tangled along the fence, and a crooked sign read, Tacoma Roots. Marley set the jars on a splintered picnic table beneath a rusted pergola. Jude lined up lids like game pieces, wiping each glass with deliberate care. The first to taste was a woman in a patched jacket. She sniffed, sampled, and her eyes filled. My God, she whispered. This tastes like before my sister left. That Christmas? Others followed, an old man recalling the steel mill before its closure, a boy with a skateboard, a soldier in fatigues. One by one, memories surfaced with each spoonful. Jude smiled, wide, unguarded, and something broke open in Marley's chest. By sunset, every jar was gone. People lingered, recording on phones, standing close as if unwilling to leave the moment. Back at the warehouse, the evening had cooled. Marley opened her laptop, the cursor blinking, steady. She reached for the drive, then the phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Clever trick today, a man said, voice calm and clipped. Feeding ghosts to the hungry. You really want people remembering what they were paid to forget, Marley stayed silent. You've had your moment, the voice dropped colder. Walk away while you still have a name. The call cut. Her laptop flickered, powered down, then restarted with a new window, file accessed remotely. 23:46 p.m. She jerked back. Jude, half asleep on the mattress, lifted his head and blinked. The warehouse felt colder. Even without wind, something crept through. Marley unplugged the external drive and snapped the laptop shut, her pulse thudding in her throat. She tiptoed to the window and peeled back the tarp just enough to glimpse the lot. A black car sat beneath the street lamp across the road. Lights off. No movement. The tarp fell back into place, tight across the pane. When she turned, Jude was sitting up. He didn't speak, only watched. She offered no explanation, only crossed the room and slid beside him on the mattress, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. His voice came out small against the silence. Do we still make more mousse tomorrow? Marley gave a single nod, though her gaze lingered on the corner, where the laptop hummed faintly in the dark. Morning arrived heavy, bringing no rest. By midday, Marley sat stiffly on the metal chair outside the counselor's office. Hands clenched in her lap thumb, rubbing tight circles over her wrist. The school reeked of floor polish and nervous sweat. Across the room, the bulletin board fluttered with flyers, dance club sign-ups, flu-shot reminders, and a torn poster for Family Unity Week. The door creaked open. Ms. Langston, thin as chalk and always speaking barely above a whisper, motioned for Marley to enter. Jude slumped in the corner, arms crossed, a bruise rising along his temple. He threw the first punch, Langston murmured after the other student made a comment about your situation. Marley's stomach twisted. Witnesses said Jude's voice had cracked when he shouted it right there in the hallway in front of lockers and lunchboxes and laughter. My mom's not trash. She's not some leftover you throw out. Langston folded her hands. Jude's clearly under strain. We're only suggesting he spend a few days with his father. It might give everyone some breathing space. Breath would not come. Marley stared through the office window out toward the playground, where the wind caught the swing chains and made them creak like old bones. Jude refused to meet her gaze on the way out. He walked 3 steps ahead to the car, hands buried in the pockets of his hoodie. By the time she reached for the handle, he had already clicked the lock down. Back at the warehouse, he withdrew to the corner without a word. Marley sat at the table, laptop open but untouched. The cursor blinked, steady, uncaring. Grace's voice echoed in her mind again. Not accusing, just tired, edged with cold intention. Sometimes letting go is the kindest thing you can do for a child. She pressed her palms to her face, dragged them downward, then reached for the thumb drive Elias had left that morning. It slid into the port with a soft click. A file appeared, audio only, scratched and uneven. Through static, Finch's voice muttered low. They'll burn every record before they let the formula surface. Because Moose doesn't decay the way memory should. They're afraid it'll remind people of what they've buried. The recording glitched, then ended in a dull hiss. She closed the lid. That night, the video from the community garden spread everywhere. Someone had edited it with dramatic piano music and bold white text. The Moose mystery band flavor returns. The comments section grew cruel within minutes. Then came the press release from Granger Foods: unauthorized food distribution by an unlicensed individual. Public safety risk under investigation. Her name appeared only in the final line. Marley Quinn has a history of instability and prior custody concerns. She drew the curtains, locked the door, left. Dishes piled in the sink. Her chest felt full of ash. The weight of being looked at again, this time by strangers behind glowing screens, curled her body inward like paper on fire. She didn't speak. Didn't text Elias back. Didn't check the messages blinking on her phone. The world pressed in from every side. At some point the night passed. Light shifted. She stood in the warehouse corner, sweeping. Bristles dragged over dusk glass and dried leaves that had slipped through the cracks. Her arms moved without urgency. From behind a stack of old pallets, Jude crouched and pulled something free. It was wrapped in torn cloth and sealed in plastic, marked with black Sharpie Finch. Back up 2. He turned, holding it out. It was stuffed behind the breaker box, he said. I think maybe he left it for you. Her hands trembled slightly as she took it, the label still faintly legible beneath a layer of grime. A soft knock rattled the warehouse door. Both their heads snapped up. Neither moved. The knock came again. Jude's fingers slipped into hers tighter than usual. She took a step forward. By the next day, whatever answers the knock might have carried were buried beneath something larger, the summons she could no longer avoid. The municipal building loomed like a cement iceberg, its gray facade untouched by sun or sentiment. Marley adjusted the collar of her coat, fingers trembling slightly as she pressed through the double doors. The interior smelled like old varnish, and coffee burned too long. Signs with block lettering guided her to the hearing room: public inquiry, unlicensed food operations. Fluorescent lights flickered above rows of metal chairs. The room buzzed with side murmurs and the occasional cough. Jude sat beside her, legs swinging, silent but watchful. His sneakers barely brushed the linoleum floor. At the front, a long table held 5 city officials each, with stacks of paper and plastic water bottles. Nameplates gleamed under the harsh lighting. Her name was listed 4th on the docket. A clerk announced it, monotone. Marley Quinn, cited for violation of municipal code 7.14, unauthorized food distribution without permit. She stepped forward. A ripple moved through the crowd. Cell phones tilted upward. Someone whispered, "That's her." The microphone whined as she sat. From the side aisle, a pair of heels clicked confidently across the floor. Celeste Granger entered, wearing navy silk, flanked by 2 lawyers and a man with a DSLR camera slung over his shoulder. The room shifted like gravity, tipping. Celeste didn't sit. She stood beside the officials and gave Marley a brief painted smile. "You're here," she said softly, as if commenting on weather. One of the council members gestured for remarks. Celeste clasped her hands. "We at Granger Foods are not here to demonize individuals, but when public safety is threatened by rogue actors, well, we have a duty to respond." She turned to Marley, her tone turning syrupy. "Are you baking or leading some flavor-based rebellion?" A few chuckles escaped from the back row. Jude's shoulders rose toward his ears. Marley didn't answer. Celeste's eyes narrowed. The Moose formula, as it exists now, complies with all food safety guidelines. If someone believes otherwise, the burden of proof lies on them. A vibration buzzed from Marley's coat pocket. She pulled the phone up beneath the desk and saw one message. Elias H., check this, now. A link, no subject. She tapped it. The video buffered screen grainy at first. Finch appeared in a dim room leaning close to the camera. His voice came low urgent. If you're watching this, I didn't disappear. I was erased. He held up a stack of papers with timestamps and lab notes. Celeste Granger ordered the reformulation, removed stabilizers, replaced them with compound, 17C. No FDA clearance, cheap, aggressive, addictive in tests. He looked over his shoulder, then leaned closer. She said memory was dangerous, that people didn't need to remember what food used to be. The footage jumped, then froze on his face. Marley's thumb hovered over the play bar. She could project this. Right now. The entire room would hear it. But her hand lowered. She locked the screen, tucked it back into her coat. Her pulse thundered, but her breathing slowed. When the officials turned to her for a final response, she simply said, I make mousse because it reminds people they're still human. And that was all. As she left, a small boy, maybe 7, tugged her sleeve and handed her a flyer. The corners were bent, the print slightly smudged. It read, good people don't need to prove. They need to stand. She looked down to thank him, but he was already vanishing into the crowd. The words lingered long after the crowd had thinned. By nightfall, she was back in the warehouse, positioning the camera. The first click cut the silence like a match struck in a cave. Marley steadied it on a stack of milk crates, angled toward the makeshift counter, and pressed record. A red light pulsed. She tied her hair back with a rag, cracked her knuckles, then reached for the tin box. The recipe, creased faint, nearly translucent from being unfolded so many times, lay beside the bowl. Overhead, fluorescent tubes buzzed. One flickered erratically, throwing shadows across bare concrete. Half-covered insulation peeled at the edges, and cords sprawled from a power strip like veins from a wounded thing. The air tasted of flour mixed with metal. Eggs, sugar, gelatin, each step traced Finch's scribbled notes precisely. Her hands followed the motions, automatically trembling, only when she lifted the copper whisk. She spoke low toward the lens. No preservatives, no shortcuts. Just memory folded in, not beaten out. When the mousse filled its metal mold, she exhaled through her nose. A sheen of sweat clung to her brow. The oven groaned as she closed it. Turning back toward the tripod, she squared her shoulders. On the wall behind her, a section scrubbed with vinegar earlier that morning doubled as a whiteboard. In thick black marker, she had written, "This is not just dessert, it's evidence." The lens stared back unblinking. She wiped her palms on her pants and glanced at the small mirror nailed near the corner shelf. A stranger might not have recognized the reflection. Her face looked hollow in places, worn thin by exhaustion. Lips cracked, skin freckled from weeks of sun and harsh light, fingers raw and blistered. Yet her eyes, sharp, steady, no longer carried hesitation. Boots tapped from the side door. Elias entered carrying a bundle of tangled wires. "You sure about this?" he asked, setting them beside the charger. "If you upload that video, it'll be open season. They'll come fast." She didn't flinch. "Good. I'm done waiting for permission." He studied her expression, found no give, and let it be. A single nod, then he bent over the wires again. Marley moved to the laptop. The cursor pulsed above the upload button. Her finger hovered. Then the room slammed into darkness. Power cut so fast the red light died mid-glow. Fans faltered. The old fridge wheezed and fell silent. From the corner, Jude looked up from his sketchpad. "Mom." She reached for him instinctively, drawing him close. The air turned colder as though the warehouse itself held its breath. A faint rumble outside. Tires over gravel. She crept toward the narrow gap at the back exit and peered through. The black sedan had returned. Parked half a block away, no lights, no stir. Jude's breath warmed her arm. "It's them again, isn't it?" Her arm tightened around him, guiding him back toward shelter. With the other, she fumbled at the emergency box near the breaker. Seconds ticked. Then a low mechanical groan stirred through the walls. The backup generator caught. A single bulb flared, washing the counter in yellow. The laptop fan word screen fluttering awake. From her coat pocket, she drew Finch's drive, the one holding the full testimony. No hesitation. She slid it in with a quiet snap. Across from the oven, a sheet pinned with binder clips hung as a makeshift screen. Plastic crackled in the warmth. A white square bloomed as the projector fired. Grainy at first, then clearing a frame emerged. Finch sat at a desk. Eyeglasses' crooked sleeves rolled. His voice cracked as he began the sound, faint yet unmistakable. Marley didn't blink. She hit go live just as the beam danced across the wall. Finch's confession spilled through static sharper than any legal brief. Light shifted over Jude's face, catching his eyes bright, hopeful then startled. Chat windows erupted. One viewer typed, "Proof this is doctored." Another wrote, "If this is true, thank you for risking everything." A third called her a liar. The contrast stung more than she had braced for. Then came Celeste's response. An official release from Granger Foods buzzed her phone naming Marley Quinn as unstable, citing hospital records after her divorce and noting severe depressive episodes. News outlets echoed the lines "unlicensed food distribution." Consumer Safety questioned each headline, clipped with files pulled from court archives. Jude stood still near the projector's base. He clutched a mug of lukewarm tea that trembled with his hand. I thought you were strong, Mom," he said, voice cracking in the echoing room. Marley held her ground. Her skin prickled under the scorching weight of scrutiny. She swallowed, glancing at her reflection in a cracked window pane across the space. Her hair was unkempt knots forming at the nape. Hands bore cuts and flour residue, but her eyes, steady, fierce, refused to falter. "No," she replied quietly. "But I'm real." Camera lights flashed from phones. Shadows of people gathered, phones aloft, watching, recording, judging. Outside, distant sirens floated into the open warehouse door. Someone in the crowd muttered, "She can't hide behind silence anymore." Marley shifted her gaze back to the screen. Finch leaned forward in the video, his features etched in low light. He accused Celeste of ordering the formula to be altered, removing stabilizers, adding compound 17C without FDA approval. He said Granger Foods sacrificed safety for profit. He warned the world moose memory, both dangerous in different ways. A comment appeared, "Real taste, real truth." Another, "This woman deserves more than sympathy." But the negativity loomed, accusations of fraud, of spectacle. Suddenly, a notification popped up. "This video has been reported for policy violations." Before she could react, the live feed cut off. The projector's light blinked out, leaving only hushed breaths in the murky space. Jude's shoulders collapsed. Tears trailed down his cheeks as he dropped the mug. It shattered, ceramic shards on concrete tea, darkening cracks in the floor. Silence swallowed the sound. A handful of people stepped forward, murmuring. Some tried linking arms with Marley. Others just watched, expression hollow. She knelt and swept up the broken pieces, dust coating her knees, the taste of defeat bitter in her mouth. Her throat burned, words lodged between truth and fear. "Mom." She looked up. His eyes were red, hands trembling at his sides. "You were strong," he repeated, quieter now. Marley took his hand. Heat surged through her fingers, even though she felt numb. Lights overhead flickered jolt by jolt. Someone shouted about evidence being removed. A phone glowed in the dark, displaying hashtags, screenshots, angry tweets. Marley saw Celeste's face smirk on a news segment, a press clip flashing across screens. Granger Foods responds to allegations, claims unverified. Distant flashes of cameras followed her as she stepped back, letting the projector's silent glow retreat. Jude back behind her. The crowd parted. Some fists clenched, some whispered apologies. The hard drive she carried felt heavy against her side. Whatever hope she lit with Finch's confession had been dimmed by these blows. The world didn't pause for apologies. She sank against a pallet stack. Her breathing hitched. Dust motes glimmered through the black gaps in the siding. The only illumination came from phones, their screens casting cold blue circles on concrete and brick. A voice from the crowd called out, "Where do you go when they erase your truth?" But it dissolved in echoes before Marley could answer. Video platforms notified her content removed due to community guidelines. The link vanished. Notifications cascaded. This piece of evidence no longer exists. Jude knelt beside her, pressing his face to her side. She felt the tremor in his body, the betrayal. She wanted to tell him she was sorry for hiding the hospital stays the nights she couldn't shake silence. But words wouldn't steady him tonight. She stood, heart pounding, palms slick with sweat and grief. The projector screen blank, the beam extinguished. People's faces blurred in darkness. Every phone light flickered like stars snuffed out one by one. Marley clutched the hard drive, pressed it against her chest, the label nearly worn off. Memory of Finch's voice still echoed in her mind. She stepped forward, leaving Jude's side. A single spotlight from a phone illuminated her path. She raised her chin, swallowed hard. The warehouse door bolt rattled. Someone pushed it, and then the door swung open. Whatever she had braced for beyond that frame, the days that followed gave no answers, only more shadows. Marley now stood before a locked storefront chest, heavy with unease. The sign that once read Heart and Sons, Repairs with Soul, was gone, leaving a pale rectangle on weathered siding. She tried the handle. Nothing. The place was hollow, stripped of machinery and memory. Where wrenches had hung, now gaped only hooks. Where oil once stained the floor, bare concrete glared up like an accusation. A folded newspaper lay crumpled in the doorway. The front page story, yellowed by sun, declared former Granger engineer linked to patent scandal. Beneath the bold headline, a photo of Elias, clean-shaven, years younger, stood beside none other than Celeste Granger. The caption dated back to 2002. Jude shifted behind her backpack, slipping on one shoulder. Was he lying the whole time? His voice came thinner than usual. Marley didn't answer. Couldn't. Something in her chest folded inward like paper soaked too long. That small warmth she'd let back and gone. She turned from the door and didn't look back. By late afternoon, they had returned to the warehouse. The space felt unfamiliar again, colder, withdrawn. She moved around the kitchen area without thought, wiping clean a counter already spotless. Jude sat at the edge of the cot, flipping through a recipe card without reading. She opened the laptop. Headlines bloomed across the screen like bruises. Granger's Grand Moose Festival, Triumph's Food, Rebel Marley, Quinn faces, Health Code Inquiry, Community turns sweet on safety, rejects rogue recipes. Her name had become a symbol, and not the one she had hoped for. The comments cut deeper. If she really cared, she'd stop. What's next? Homemade vaccines. Mothers like that shouldn't raise kids. She closed the screen. No dinner that night. Jude didn't ask. He only sat still, eyes flicking toward the metal tin on the shelf, the one from Finch, the one Elias had claimed held nothing. Her gaze followed his. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled it down. The lid resisted. A trace of old lavender drifted out, tinged with rust. Beneath recipe cards and one brittle photo of Finch smiling, something slid a false bottom. She froze, then lifted it. Pressed flat in wax paper lay a sealed envelope. Handwriting scrawled across the front. Private, for MQ only. She lowered herself into a chair, legs suddenly weak. Fingers hovered over the fold. Jude leaned close. MQ. That's you, isn't it? No reply. She simply opened it. A notarized transfer of intellectual property lay within. Signed by Marshall Finch. The recipient, Marley Quinn. Sound seemed to drain from the room. The fluorescent light above flickered once, then held steady. Marley exhaled. Her name was on a legal document older than her son. Footsteps broke the quiet. Not in the room, but in her own head. Memory raced back to every conversation with Elias, every sideways glance. She thought of his hesitations, his vague timelines, the stories he didn't tell. Jude asked again, softer this time. Does that mean it's yours now? The moose. The machine. Marley stared at the paper. It means it was never hers to begin with, she muttered. From somewhere beyond the warehouse walls, laughter echoed faintly, part of Granger's festival downtown. She imagined booths with banners, kids running past moose mascots, and executives toasting tiny plastic cups of cream and lies. She walked back to the kitchen, envelope still in hand. The air felt tighter now, like even the building had stopped breathing. Jude knelt near the supply box, pretending to organize jars. Do you still trust anybody? He asked. I don't know, Marley whispered almost to herself. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything they couldn't say. As she reached to slide the envelope behind the spice tins, her hand brushed the tin's interior. Something clicked. A second compartment. She hadn't seen it before. It had no latch, just pressure fit. With a twist, it came loose, revealing a small flash drive. No label, just a handwritten sticker back up. Finch Vare. Jude's eyes widened. Was that always there? I don't think so, Marley murmured, stunned. The door creaked faintly from a gust outside. She tucked the drive into her jeans pocket, heart pounding harder than it should. A fresh storm rolled in, thickening the sky beyond the broken window. She set the tin down. It felt heavier than it ever had before. By the next morning, she carried more than the flash drive. She carried Finch's papers, the envelope, every scrap of proof she had. The office was painfully sterile. White tile, white walls, white fluorescent hum. Marley stood at the counter, fingers gripping a folder, smudged with flour at the edges. Across from her, the notary scanned each page slowly, his eyes flicking behind silver frames. A small clock ticked above the copy machine. She thought it might be the loudest thing she'd ever heard. He finally looked up. "This is legitimate," he said, voice flat. "The signature is notarized, the transfer language is clear. This legally names you as the intellectual heir to the pure Finch baking method and machinery." He handed the papers back like they might burn him. Marley stepped into the late morning haze. Sunlight reflected off the pavement in ripples. She didn't hesitate. She uploaded the document on every platform. She had her website, social emails, to journalists she'd bookmarked but never dared contact. The heading read, "Finch never vanished. He chose who carried the flame." She hit send. Within an hour, her inbox flooded. Comments poured in. Retweets multiplied. A journalist from Portland messaged first, then someone from Chicago. By afternoon, a news collective in San Francisco published a short expose titled "Mother Mechanic Moose: How a Warehouse Inheritance is Threatening a Giant." Hashtag Finch Formula had begun to trend. Someone even drew a cartoon Celeste Granger standing on a crumbling moose tower while Marley lit it from beneath with a blowtorch. Jude read over her shoulder and giggled. "You're kind of famous now," he said. She smiled at him, but it didn't reach her eyes. Later that night, she watched the news alone. The anchor's voice was even, but something in his cadence had changed. Granger Foods was now under review. A federal inquiry launched into historical patent practices and food safety violations. Celeste's face was no longer pristine on the screen. It flickered, pixelated, a brand unraveling. Marley didn't celebrate. She stared at the grainy photo of Finch in the corner of the room as if asking for permission. She whispered, "We're not done, are we?" A soft knock broke the silence. Jude appeared in the doorway holding a mug. "I made you cocoa," he said a bit too proudly. She took it, warmed by more than the drink. "You believe me now." He tilted his head. "I never stopped." The next morning, a producer from Channel 8 requested a live appearance. Morning Pulse, a regional show with national reach. They wanted both sides. They wanted fireworks. She agreed. The studio was colder than the warehouse had ever been. She waited backstage, mic clipped to her collar, hands clenched under the tablecloth. Through the crack in the curtain, she could see Celeste already seated, surrounded by her team. Tailored navy suit, pearls, composure weaponized. The host leaned into his camera as the countdown began. Coming up, a surprising twist in the Moose Wars. Can one woman and a very old recipe challenge an empire? Red light blinked. The cameras rolled. Ms. Granger, the host, began with recent developments. "Do you believe a single mother with a damaged past could possibly topple a company like yours?" Celeste didn't flinch. "I don't respond to emotionally charged hypotheticals." The camera panned wide. Marley stepped into frame heels, scuffing the edge of the platform curls, barely tamed blouse wrinkled from the van ride. She met Celeste's gaze and didn't blink. The host smiled a little too sharp. "And here she is now." As the segment shifted, Marley said nothing at first. She simply opened her folder, spread the notarized document across the desk, and pushed it forward with deliberate calm. Celeste glanced down. For the first time, her fingers curled. The host cleared his throat. "Would you like to respond, Ms. Granger?" But the camera had already caught the moment, truth set, plainly before power, no longer certain. Days later, that same folder was still in her hands as the council chamber doors gave a soft echo. She stepped through, clutching it tight under her arm. Rain pounded the tall windows, streaks of water distorting faces beyond the glass. She breathed in damp wood and polished metal, steadying herself. At the head of the dais, the presiding chairwoman arranged her papers, microphones, and water glass with practiced precision. She cleared her throat, signaling Marley's turn. Jude stood at her side, silent, clutching her hand like the only anchor left. Marley raised her voice, letting the room still. "I am not here to resurrect someone else's past. I want my son to eat moose that doesn't taste like betrayal. Murmurs rippled. Phones lifted. People leaned forward. Celeste waited near the back posture, rigid expression carved from confidence. Her attorney scribbled notes without glancing up. Marley placed the folder on the table and slid 3 packets forward. First, the legal transfer of Pure Finch rights to her. Second, Finch's unedited recording. Third, a dossier naming banned additives used by Granger, Foods notes, internal memos, lab data, FDA citations. The documents passed from hand to hand. Someone gasped. One board member frowned at the FDA list, flipping pages. Another leaned over to whisper behind his palm. Marley held her ground chin, lifted eyes steady. Celeste's mask wavered muscles, flattening a flicker of worry breaking through. Her lawyers exchanged glances before one stepped up to the microphone. "You're accusing us without full verification," he said, voice low and rumbling. "These claims about Finch, they require context." A counselor leaned forward, tapping the table with one finger. Context. The creator's own voice was recorded. The documents are notarized. The additives are clearly listed. How much context is enough? Celeste drew a slow breath, then released it with measured control. Emotional instability was documented. Finch struggled. Some say passion turned obsession. We distanced ourselves legally. We developed new formulations. Her tone wavered just slightly. She adjusted her jacket. Thunder rolled overhead. The ceiling lights flickered with the storm's pull, but no one remarked on it. After hours of questioning, the board announced its decision. Granger Foods' moose line would be suspended at once. Federal regulators would investigate patent practices and safety violations. Stern faces nodded in agreement. The fate of Pure Finch now rested on truth. Celeste didn't wait for the verdict's weight to settle. She rose abruptly, silence gripped like a weapon, and strode out, heels striking coat sweeping her shoulders. Reporters called her name. She never turned. Doors closed, muffling her exit. Marley exhaled, the pressure easing from her chest. Jude squeezed her hand as they walked the long corridor damp with rain. Drops slid from awnings, courthouse steps glistening under the lamps. They crossed plazas beneath umbrellas, weaving past cameras and raised signs. Some strangers offered nods. Others whispered. Marley lifted her eyes to the sky, thinking of Finch of truths buried too long. At a stone bench under a bare tree, she paused. Puddles spread around her boots. Jude sat splashing the shallow water. She knelt beside him. "Mama," he whispered, palms cupping the puddle curls plastered to his forehead. "Do you think Moose remembers people?" She let silence stretch, watching his reflection shiver across the surface. Then gently, "Yes." Because it was never forced to forget. His grin flickered, small but sure. She stood, pulled him close, umbrella lifted above them. Droplets struck her brim, mingling with tears she hadn't realized had fallen. Camera flashes cut the air, reporters leaning forward, pens raised. She walked on, letting the wash of light move over her like a baptism of truth. Jude pressed tighter against her side. She straightened her coat, squared her shoulders. Rain slicked the courthouse steps in labyrinthine patterns. She drew a long breath. The world still threatened laws, lawsuits, rumors, but in the chill of stone and storm, something steady rooted beneath her ribs. Finch's tin box, held close beneath her arm, carried the weight of proof, heritage, inheritance, truth. They slipped past the final knot of reporters. A car door slammed somewhere down the street. Water trickled from awnings. Overhead, a sign flipped from closed to open as a cafe lit its lamps. Marley pushed the door, Jude close behind. For a moment, the fractured world seemed to lean in. By dawn, the quiet had followed them home. The faucet dripped a slow, patient rhythm, filling the stillness of early morning. Marley sat at the kitchen table, elbows on the worn wood, steam rising from a chipped mug. No one else stirred. The house, hers now, was hushed. Pale sunlight filtered through the boarded windows, striping the floor. No mold, no dust in the corners. The walls, once peeling, now held Jude's drawings taped proudly in place. A crooked shelf above the sink carried 3 jars flour sugar cocoa. Nothing fancy but full. She reached across the table and tapped the recorder. A faint blink, then Finch's voice rasped through static. "If there's anyone left who still has the recipe, they don't need to remake the moose. They just need to remember why they ever wanted to." The click of the tape faded. Marley leaned back. The words threaded through her chest, neither answer nor command, only reminder. She rose slowly, stretching sore shoulders, and drifted toward the back door. The morning air was soft, cool with earth and the faint sweetness of the neighbor's apricot tree. The warehouse door creaked open. Jude crouched there, tongue caught between his teeth, chalk stub gripped in one hand. Words sprawled across the metal in uneven rows. Quinn's real moose, made from real things. The chalk squeaked as he pressed harder on the last word. His handwriting slanted wildly. No spaces, no hesitation. Marley opened her mouth, a reflex to correct him, to ask why he didn't ask first, to say the paint would hold better than chalk. But the words stalled in her throat. He didn't turn around, didn't glance for approval. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching him underline real things. The phrase caught in her chest, all the fake apologies she'd been fed, the phony legal statements, the empty comfort phrases from social workers, neighbors, lawyers, ex-husbands. Real things. That's what they'd been missing. She let out a breath that sounded like a laugh, though nothing was funny. Just strange, maybe. Strange to stand in the light and not brace for impact. Jude finally noticed her. His eyes searched hers, waiting for the scolding. She tilted her head slightly and shrugged. I guess the name's taken now. He grinned, relief spreading over his face. His shirt had cocoa smudges on it, one shoelace untied. Still, something in the way he stood, feet planted, chin up, made him look older than 10. Marley stepped closer, crouched beside him and brushed a fingertip along the chalk line. Spell check, might not love it, she murmured. Too late. He wiped his hands on his jeans. Sunlight struck the window pane behind them, a quick glint across the glass. Somewhere deeper in the house, the faucet finally stopped its patient drip. She turned back toward the room, saw the scuffed counter, the patched ceiling, the crooked tiles she and Jude had once tried to level with a hammer and hope. It wasn't much. Yet her eyes no longer sought the flaws first. Now she noticed the shelf that had held steady for weeks, the drawers that slid open without catching. In the glass, her reflection hovered, faint hair-tangled eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. But sharper, clearer. I'm not failing him, she whispered. Not to Jude, not even to the air. Just enough for herself to hear. That ache she'd carried like a second spine curving every choice, every step had dulled. Not gone, but no longer master of her days. The shame, the thought that looped endlessly, I'm not enough, had sunk to the background. Fear remained, yes, but she wasn't running. From the stove, the kettle let out a low whistle, steam curling upward, like a fresh idea taking shape. Marley rose, dusting chalk from her palms, eyes returning to the words scrawled across the door. You really think it needs the real part? Jude looked up at her, squinting in the light. Yeah, people lie a lot. So, real stuff should say it's real. She smiled, almost wincing at how true it was. Good point. He picked up the chalk again, adding a small underline beneath Quinn's. They lingered there, him redrawing the cue to make it look cooler, her letting the silence stretch. Not empty, not tense. Just quiet like a breath, finally let go. Marley didn't know what would follow. Lawsuits might still be waiting. Granger wouldn't fold without clawing back. But none of that mattered in this moment. There would be time to prepare, time to face the storm. Right now, the sun hit the corner of the door just right, and her son believed in something with both hands. She let the light rest there a little longer, until footsteps outside reminded her the world hadn't paused. By the week's end, that same quiet strength carried her into the hearing. The courtroom wasn't grand. It smelled of old paper and industrial cleaner, and the chairs squeaked whenever someone shifted. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flat and indifferent. Marley sat on the left back, straight palms steady on her thighs. To her right, Jude scribbled in a worn notebook, glancing up every few minutes as if he could read something in her posture. 3 administrative judges entered without ceremony. No jury. Only formality, procedure, finality. Across the aisle, Granger's lawyers filled an entire row, sharp-suit, stiffer expressions. Celeste herself was absent. In her place stood a silver-haired attorney voice, like wet gravel face without apology. He didn't smile once. Marley had expected more of a fight. But after weeks of headlines, backlash, video leaks, signed transfers, and public records, little remained to contest. The harm hadn't come from her, but from the truth. And this room wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was a reckoning. Her advocate, a young woman from the public clinic, rose with steady confidence and submitted the compiled evidence. The judges flipped through page after page, certification of Finch's original formula annotated in his dated chemical notes. A notarized transfer of intellectual property, signed and verified. Independent lab reports outlining the long-term risks of the synthetic additive Granger had introduced. No one disputed a word. On Granger's side, an assistant bent to whisper to a colleague. Their lead counsel remained still waiting his turn. When it came, he offered nothing beyond his client had no comment and would comply with the board's decision. The deliberation lasted barely 20 minutes. When the panel returned, their tone stayed neutral, but the weight of it settled heavy. The verdict, Marley Quinn, was the rightful holder of the Pure Finch trademark, the formula and its legacy. Granger Foods would be fined, ordered to halt moose production at once, strip all prior ads claiming memory-safe innovation, and fund public campaigns on labeling transparency. The room didn't erupt. No applause. Only the gavel's tap and the rustle of coats being gathered. For a moment, Marley stayed still, fingers gripping the chair, as if bracing for a delayed shock. Joy never came, only a hollow quiet. She rose slowly, cast one glance across the chamber, then turned without speaking. Beyond the main doors, flashes sparked behind frosted glass. Reporters clustered, microphones poised, questions sharpened. She chose the side hall instead, palm brushing the wall as she walked. Jude trailed her silent until the cool air met them. "Did we win?" he asked. She kept moving a beat longer before answering softly, "I think we finished something." He didn't push. His hand slid into hers. On the courthouse lawn, a damp bench waited. She sat coat, soaking the moisture, while a pigeon pecked at a muffin wrapper nearby. For a while, she watched it in silence. A van engine rumbled behind them. "Do you think she'll go to jail?" Jude asked at last. Marley exhaled. "That's not up to me." He traced the seam of the bench. "People still believe her. Some do, some always will." Her voice stayed steady, free of bitterness. "I don't get it. Even when you show the truth, they don't always care." She paused. "That's the thing about truth. It doesn't shout. It waits solid, patient. And the ones who need it most, they'll find it." Jude leaned against her. She wrapped an arm around his shoulders. Across the street, a businessman paused to scan his phone. The words "Granger Recall" flashed briefly before the screen dimmed. The world hadn't changed overnight, but something had shifted, a small realignment. Enough. She closed her eyes, let the wind brush her face. No cheers, no parade, just the scent of wet pavement and budding trees. "Can we get fries?" Jude tugged her sleeve. Marley looked down, then laughed softly. Yeah, we can get fries." Together they rose and walked into a city still undecided about them. It didn't matter. They had done what they came to do, fully, quietly. Late afternoon stretched gold across the warehouse windows, catching suspended dust and the curve of hanging lights Marley had strung herself. The air no longer smelled of rust, only butter and sugar mingled with faint laughter drifting in. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped through the half-open door dividing the kitchen from the new front space. Sunlight streamed through wide, clear panes. Once cracked and boarded, now they framed a small crowd. Neighbors' children, two elderly women sipping tea by a crate, turned into a table. Jude stood behind the counter they had built from an old workbench, apron, bright sleeves rolled flour-dusted across the front. Pride tugged at his face. A girl barely taller than the counter rose on her toes. "Can I have another moose?" Jude studied her seriously. "If you like it, you have to know. Moose doesn't keep past today, but the feeling it leaves, that sticks." The girl blinked, then grinned, cradling her paper cup like treasure as she skipped off. Marley laughed under her breath and approached with a fresh tray. "We might need a warning sign for poetic side effects," she teased, setting it down. He smirked. "I learned from the best." On the wall between two repurposed bookshelves hung a framed black and white photo, Marshall Finch, young eyes, intense sleeves rolled just like Jude's. Beneath it, pinned neatly, was a slip of yellowed paper in fading ink. No one can erase a recipe if someone remembers the taste. Customers rarely asked about it. Some paused, glanced, then moved on. Others lingered as if searching for something unnamed. Wind rattled the string lights gently. Children chalked hopscotch squares on the pavement. A potted plant had been set on the front step. A man from next door fastened the last section of bulbs between rafters and a street lamp. At the far corner, Elias stood with hands in his coat pockets. He didn't approach, didn't wave. But when Marley caught his gaze, he nodded once, a quiet, precise gesture. She returned it. No apologies passed. None needed. She sank onto the bench near the counter beside Jude, who was already scribbling menu ideas into a notebook labeled Quinn's Real Moose Crookedly Taped. She leaned over. "You spelled raspberry wrong." He grinned, shrugged. Creative license. They sat like that, elbow to elbow. Her hands were dry flour caught beneath her nails. There were Bill's waiting machines that still hiccuped mid-churn and a pipe that leaked whenever it rained. But her mind was elsewhere. Her gaze drifted to the old moose machine tucked in the corner under soft amber light. Still patched, still noisy at startup, but working. It had never stopped. Through silence, sabotage, doubt, it had endured. Jude tapped her arm, whispered, "Want to try this one?" "It's not perfect." She took the spoon he offered and tasted. There it was again, not just flavor. Something deeper, like memory, like courage spun into sugar. "It's real," she said. The sky shifted toward dusk, light softening on the windows. A voice called goodbye at the door. Another neighbor waved. There was no announcement, no final chord, no standing ovation, just a slice of moose between two people who no longer needed proof that they had done something extraordinary. She smiled at Jude and nudged his shoulder. "Let's make another batch." Marley never set out to change the world. She only wanted a safe place for her son and a taste of something honest. But by refusing to stay silent, she reminded us even the smallest acts of truth stirred with care can outlast the loudest lies. If this story stirred something in you, don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more emotional journeys just like this one.